Well, Tim, welcome to the ICA Health and Wellness Committee's podcast series.
Thank you very much.
We are here at the ICA 2022 Reno, Nevada, and we just booked this room, this beautiful room for this podcast series with you. Before we start, I'd like to say a few words about you.
Okay.
So, name is Timothy Bonenfant, and he is a clarinet professor at Angelo State University, also the Texas ICA chair.
Yes.
As well as he is a part member of the Mesquite faculty trio at ASU University, and also member of the Batik Quartet. So again, welcome here. You have a fascinating story. I'd like to hear that.
We'll get into that.
So tell us first, what is your story? How did it start? What it involves, your eye, and how did it start?
It started in early to mid 80s with a diagnosis of a corneal condition known as keratoconus, which basically takes the cornea and stretches it out so that it forms cracks in the cornea itself vertically, and that can distort the shape of the cornea, and therefore it can distort the vision in tandem with that. And I was told I would need cornea transplants in order to fix that. I was in my early 20s at the time, so I was not anticipating that it would be something that I would be having to deal with in the immediate future. And I was prescribed some hard contact lenses to wear. They were quite uncomfortable. The nature of the condition is such that my eyes were constantly changing shape.
Okay.
So by the time I was fitted for a pair of contacts, and then they had them made and shipped back, by the time I got them back, they didn't fit anymore.
Okay. So my follow-up question, was the first diagnosis a right diagnosis?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Okay.
And
So
I'm
solution
still-
didn't work.
Well, that solution prior to the surgeries,
Yeah.
it was just changing too rapidly, and as it turned out, I actually had the first set of cornea transplants that they said I would need to have before I turned 30. It was a lot sooner than I was expecting.
So tell us a little bit, what were some of the diagnoses and some of the symptoms that you felt with the corneal disease?
It was just a general loss of vision that I had not worn glasses prior to my 20s. I had perfectly fine vision, and evidently the condition is such that it doesn't really manifest itself until you're out of puberty.
Okay.
So, and then at that point, you start experiencing a decline in visual acuity. And that's basically it. I went into a couple of eye doctors, they gave me glasses, and then finally, I think about 84, I had one who looked at it and just said, oh yeah, you've got this. And it's not really all that different than, needing glasses at first until somebody actually takes a look for that and figures out that's what you have. But evidently, to an eye doctor, it's very easy to look at someone with this condition and know they have it. I did try to get into the military to join one of the service bands, and they rejected me because of this. And the guy doing the eye check took one look at me and went, yeah, keratoconus, you're out. I barely spent a minute with the man.
So very visible to a professional.
To a professional, yes. And when I first met the doctor who did the first series of transplants, he entered his office door where I was sitting, and he looked at me, he says, wow, that's the worst case of keratoconus in someone so young I've ever seen, from across the room.
Good to hear.
It's like, oh, okay, should I be driving?
I understand. So how did it follow after that? After the first diagnosis and some possible solutions with hard contact lenses?
Well, at that point when I met that doctor I just mentioned, that was February of 90, he was gung-ho just to get the surgery done as soon as possible. And I had moved to Las Vegas from Southern California, specifically because I got a job with insurance. and I knew I was going to eventually need this surgery. I just wasn't expecting it within the first year of moving back. And so we set up everything. They did whatever tests they need to do, blood pressure and everything, to make sure that you're okay to have surgery. And in, I think it was May 1st or 2nd, I had the first transplant done within that year. So they did the second one in August of that same year, and that one was a little rough because I was really, both eyes were still recovering at that point. And after the first one, I didn't have too much problem. I had to stop playing for a few weeks just because of the pressure. But I was able to start driving after about 2 or 3 weeks, and was able to use my other eye.
After the second transplant?
No, after the first
transplant. Okay.
And I remember being in the parking lot of the apartment complex I was living in, and I knew that they did the eye that had the worst vision first, so that you would still, if something went wrong, you'd still have your quote unquote good eye to see out of till you had other things done. But you have a dominant eye. Everybody's got one, and you can probably figure out which one it is just by opening and closing.
Absolutely.
And I knew that my dominant eye at that point had to be the left one because this one had just been transplanted. I remember very vividly the moment when my dominant eye switched. I felt it like that, backing the car out of that parking lot. And I just stopped for a minute and went, whoa. And I went on to this concert I was at, and I told some friends there, hey, this just happened. I mean, it was an instantaneous thing. It wasn't a gradual. I was expecting more of a gradual process, but it was boom. And I literally felt something in my brain click. It's fascinating.
It's an experience. Very nice. So, since you started having issues with the eye and the first transplant happened, what was the time difference between those two?
Like I said, I think the original diagnosis was 84. These transplants, the first set of them, were in 1990, that summer. And like I said, I had the first one in May, second one in August. As it turns out, they probably should have waited a little while longer in between, but they didn't know that at the time. They were constantly making advances in how they deal with this, like they do with anything medical.
Absolutely.
So that was part of the reason that after the second transplant in August, I stopped driving for 3 months because I just could not keep my eyes open. It's made my eyes very light sensitive, and I'm prone to that anyway, being sort of a blonde dude. So I had to stop. Fortunately, where I worked at the time was within walking distance to my apartment, and so eventually it sort of healed enough that I was able to safely get behind the wheel of the car again. I was able to play still. Okay. It took a little longer, but I did play a couple of concerts. I had to make sure I didn't have a light shining directly in my eye, like from floodlights or anything like that, but I was able to play. Okay. So that was helpful. And then both of those transplants ended up being quite successful. And they lasted, 20, 25 years before I started noticing more problems.
Okay.
And when I hit my 50s, it really started to, something's not right. And so I saw a doctor in San Angelo and said, you had keratoconus? I says, yes. Well, change that to have, because it's back. And I did not know it at the time. My old doctor had to mention this, and again, maybe they didn't know. But evidently, keratoconus can recur. It's almost like, you can have cancer recur, but, at least with keratoconus, you're not going to die from that. Yes. So, but I did start having my vision deteriorate as I hit my mid-50s. And he set me up with... He tried to send me some places in Austin and Dallas to get fitted for some special lenses, what they call sclera lenses, that are huge, about the size of your eyeball, basically, whereas most contacts are very tiny. And that was never really successful because, again, my eyes were constantly changing shape. And the nature of the disease is such that if your eye's like this, it takes a certain portion of it. And for me, it was down in this part of the eye, and it just flattens it out. So it'll almost be a perfect sphere here, and then all of a sudden it's like the side of a mountain fell off. And so they never did fit. And eventually I got sent out to Houston. San Angelo is a fairly small town. They've got some decent doctors there, but for a specialty like that, they have to send you out to some of the major cities. And so I got hooked up with a doctor out there. We set up when I'd have the surgery, and they did the first one there in December of 14. And I was staying with a very good friend, Dick Nunemaker, who's part of the ICA community. He was recently retired at that point from the Houston Symphony. Been there for 40 years. And we'd done a lot of playing together, and when he found out that my doctor was in Houston, he just said, well, stay with us. So in that respect, I didn't have to worry about the medical expenses. He and his wife would drive me back and forth to both the surgery and the post-op appointments and so forth. So it helps to have, you're going to need other people around.
Yes,
for a lot of that.
Absolutely. How long did it take for you to stay in Houston for this another surgery or operation?
Well, they wanted to see me a couple times within a week or two, just to make sure, because chances are that if something's going to go wrong, it'd be very soon afterwards. So I stayed with Dick and Linda for a while until the doctor gave the go-ahead. And I had already had plans, because this was December. I was going to go to Florida to spend Christmas with my family, and I actually moved out to Florida for the recovery period, because I was anticipating that at some point I'd have the other one done.
So the surgery pretty much was a quick surgery with a quick recovery time, right? At the point?
At that point, yes, but then it turned out that initial, the donor cornea itself was defective. So I had also, with the doctor in Houston, set up visits with a doctor in Orlando near my folks, so that I could do he could check to see the progress, how I was doing. And within a month, the doctor in Orlando figured out that I wasn't able to see anything. That donor cornea was just not doing anything for me. So he had a chat with the doctor in Houston, and it was arranged that I would fly back and have the surgery redone in early February.
Okay.
Which I did. I remember flying back, and they picked me up at the airport that week, and we watched the Super Bowl that day, and the next day I went in to see the surgeon I already had experience with, and he just checked out the eye to make sure that what he was hearing from the doctor in Orlando was actually what was happening. And he said, and we've already got a donor, cornea ready to go. So 2 days later, I had my second transplant within a couple months.
Okay.
And that one went fairly well. It lasted for a while.
Okay. So you also mentioned that you fell on your face.
That was a bit later.
So that was a later thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
This was February of 15. I actually had went for a good year or so with everything going fine. They removed the stitches little by little as you go in for visits, and I would have to drive back to Houston and have them take a look at everything. And they had everything out. They had fitted me with a contact lens for that eye. And then June of 16, I was noticing the contact was not feeling good. It was irritating my eye a bit. I could only go an hour or so with it in, whereas I was used to wearing it all day. And I was also noticing that my vision was starting to go a little wacky. And this was when I had flown to Florida to spend some time with my folks over the summer. And the doctor had set me up in Houston to have the other eye done. I was far enough along in that. But some insurance problems came up. He was not dealing with my insurance company anymore. So I went out there just because I already had the plane ticket. And it's never a bad idea to visit your family when they get to a certain age. And while I was at my folks', that's when this really started to get bothersome. So I saw a doctor in Orlando, and they sort of got it under control. And after I flew back home to Texas in early July, that's when it really started to go. And I got introduced to a doctor in San Angelo who dealt with these kind of things, but didn't really do transplants as a general rule. He was able to do that occasionally. But he took a look at me and went, yeah, it's not good. And we were getting ready also to go to ICA in Lawrence that summer. And I was playing a piece with Dick, so I went to Houston to rehearse with him. And I figured, while I'm there, let me have the doc who did the surgery take a look at it and see if it's really what we think it is. And he looked at it and he said, yeah, it's rejected. You're going to have another surgery. But he still couldn't take me on because of the insurance issues. So I knew I'd rejected. That made ICA real interesting.
Okay.
Although, I did perform, but at that point, I don't think I had the iPad yet.
It's a 12-inch iPad, right?
Yes. And so I had the music I was playing on blown up to 11 by 17. It must look ridiculous from the audience, but that's what I needed.
Absolutely.
And Dick was very gracious, worked with me, and we worked out. I actually recopied the pieces I was doing to allow for, just allow me to blow it up larger on the 11 by 17 paper, and also to put page turns. I remember very specifically, I had a page turn where I would just take 2 pages and flip them over, and Dick said something about, oh, you're really going to turn the page there? Well, where's better? So we figured out a better spot, and then when I got home after that rehearsal, I adjusted the music, and so it worked out pretty well that way. And the folks in the Batik Quartet that you mentioned, we performed there as well, and I had all our music blowing up quite a bit. And the performances actually went very well. It's some of the best playing I'd done, despite the fact that I had these massive headaches from just all the pressure up here, but everything just went really well. I remember running into Teresa Martin at one of the receptions, and we had played a piece of hers with the quartet, and she was very complimentary. And I'm thinking, if you only knew how hard this was. But I've talked to Teresa since then. So
nice. So tell us a little bit about how a disease like this would apply to a clarinetist professionally, what modification they might have to do, what are some of the things that we might not even hear or see, but the person is dealing with that. Physically, emotionally, job, existentially, family-wise, what are some of the things that really are some surrounding this disease?
I would say with any eye disease, you're going to run into some of the same issues. Just your ability to be able to see the music clearly. It's something we take for granted at a certain level, because we look at the music on the stand and we know what the language is, we know what to expect, but when the music moves around and you're not really sure what staff line something on, that can create a lot of problems for obvious reasons. I mean, everybody watching this, I don't need to explain that to anybody. And then after a while, it does also start to take a whack at your self-esteem. It's like, I used to be able to do this. Yeah, I shouldn't let this stand in the way. But sometimes you just have to, accept things as they are. I live alone most of the time, so I didn't really have any issues with family that some people might have. But there were times when I would need to get assistance getting into work. Most of the time it wasn't that big a deal. I lived like 6 minutes from work, so.
It was easier, but definitely, as you mentioned, with Dick and his wife, the person in need needs.
Well, yes. At the time, right after the surgeries, yes, most definitely. And on that trip, when I went out to Florida, I brought my car with me because I knew eventually I'd be able to drive it. But my brother actually flew out from Florida when I got the okay to go out there, and he drove my car with all my instruments closed for 6 months and so forth. So my family was very helpful without any doubt whatsoever. I'm surprised my parents were able to keep up, were able to deal with me living under their roof, having a son in their mid-50s living at home, after all, is not something everybody looks forward to.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You mentioned headache. Was it a natural part of this, either surgery or the disease, or was it something that accompanied unnecessarily?
It's kind of related to what's going on with the eye in that more to do with ocular pressure.
Okay.
And the doctor I've got in San Angelo is really monitoring that with me right now. Doesn't want it to get very high at all because that can create other eye issues that are much worse and are not fixable.
So can you tell us what ocular pressure is?
There's these machines that they basically hold up to your eye and it takes a pressure reading. And most normal pressure might be anywhere between, I don't even know what the units are, but between say 5 and 20.
Okay.
And if it starts to get into 25s, then they get a little concerned. After the fall, which you've mentioned, I had pressure upwards to like 40, 50. And they were not happy with that.
And your eye was bruised, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
So anyway, I'll get to that story as quickly as I can. After I had the rejection and I got hooked up with a doctor in Lubbock at the Texas Tech University up there, I got a surgery scheduled there for December of 16. That went fairly well, and my mom actually flew out from Florida and drove me up to Lubbock and back for the 2 days I needed to be up there for the surgery. And that went well. I would go up to Lubbock periodically to have him check it out, and the doctor I have in San Angelo would take pressure readings and so forth. And then in August of 17, it was just a couple weeks after ICA in Orlando, I tripped. I stubbed my toe on a sidewalk that was near a ramp, so it was a very gradual thing that was going up, and I didn't see it. And I fell directly onto my eye. I'm sure you're going to show that picture at some point. And I almost lost the eye, never mind, the transplant. I really did some serious damage to it. And
how did it complicate your case?
It changed my life completely. I was at an auto shop. I was having my brakes fixed, and the guys from the shop got me in their car and said, "Okay, we're going to take you to the emergency room." I said, No. Take me to my eye doctor. So they did that. And I walked in, and I had just seen the doctor the day before. So I'm sure he wasn't expecting me at all. So I walked in to the front desk where they were. I said, "I need to see the doc. I've just fallen, and I have a feeling it's bad." And they said, "Well, he's in surgery. He'll be out in about 20 minutes. So just go sit in one of the chairs, and he'll take a look at you when he's done." So I placed a couple phone calls to some people, said, this just happened, I'm not sure what's going on. 20 minutes later, he walks in, he's still in his scrubs, and he puts the apparatus in front of my eye, takes a look at me, and just goes and curses out loud because he knew it was bad. And at that point, they put me in a wheelchair and they wheeled me into surgery, and I had surgery within an hour or two after I fell. And what happened there was they told me it punctured the globe, so I actually had a hole in my eye. The transplant itself, 3/4 of the stitches were ripped out. There is a fluid that normally resides behind the cornea that sort of balances everything out. A lot of that was, this will sound a little gross, but it basically squirted out. And so they were really worried about just, saving the eye itself. And then I found out a little later on that I also damaged my pupil, which further complicated the light sensitivity issues later on. But they managed to save it. I woke up and there was a friend of mine sitting, waiting for me to wake up, and he drove me home. And I went in the next day, they took off the bandages, and that's where that bruise comes from that you saw. And I had to go in a week and a half later. The fluid that had left my body at that point, it needed to be replaced with something. Otherwise, I was in very serious possibility of having a retinal detachment. And that's very bad news if that happens. So a week and a half later, I went in. They took out what was in there and then filled in behind my eye with this fluid they used to replace that. And it took me a couple weeks just to sort of get through a lot of that, because one of the things that happened as a result of that is there are these gas bubbles on the inside of your eye that you see them constantly. It doesn't matter if your eye is open or closed, but there was this giant black bubble. And the only way I could not see that was just to sleep. And I was also, and it was a week before school started, so I was having to deal with having to get into work. I had some dynamite colleagues who would take me into work every day.
What was the pain that you experienced at this time?
That was mostly the eye pressure, because my eye pressure after that fall was very high. That's when it hit the 40s and 50s. And it just gave me severe headaches, especially around bright lights. I had all the lights in my house turned off, basically. I had somebody from physical plant at work come into my office and take out a lot of the light bulbs in the ceiling units just to make my office darker. And my students, God bless them, they were just like, whatever you need to do, Dr. B, we'll bring in a stand light if we need to. They were great. But it was an interesting thing having to teach lessons without being able to demonstrate anything, not being able to play at all, because they were okay. With cornea transplant, you can sort of play after a couple of weeks, but with what had happened to me, is like, no, we'll give you the go-ahead when you feel like you can play. But they were so concerned about the pressure on my eye. That's why they don't want you playing, is playing actually puts pressure on everything in here, and they just didn't want to take the chance.
How long did it take for you to put down the clarinet and then again take it back up and play?
I could play maybe 5 minutes in October, and the fall was in August. I started driving around town in late October, early November. I would only drive at night, which is ironic because now I really don't like driving at night. But San Angelo's in the middle of a desert. It's bright there. So I really could not go outside. If I was going outside, I was doing this to hide my eyes all the time. So I would, go grocery shopping after the sun went down.
You mentioned many of the surrounding issues with an eye problem of your kind, having to require assistance, a lot of going to work, going to work, going to doctor, driving sometimes, being able to walk only. But what are some of the, you mentioned headache, but what are some of the emotional stress that it puts on someone?
Well, yeah, it was definitely, I was not diagnosed as such, but I undoubtedly had some form of depression going on. I think a lot of that was related to the fact that I couldn't play.
Okay.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are seeing this, that's one of the reasons why we get involved in music, is because that playing is so much a part of the way we express ourselves. And I was used to doing, recitals every semester, and that just all came to a halt. And I just didn't know what to do with myself. And I was on the phone quite a bit with a very good friend who was a nurse. And she was saying, no, you got to get used to this. This is your life now. And I didn't want to accept that. And eventually, you just do.
This is a huge change.
Yeah, it is. My life is very different now since that fall. One of the things that's made it a little bit easier is this iPad we're going to talk about in a few moments. But just learning what was the best way to see the music, to prepare the music so I could see it well enough so that I could be confident in what I was doing.
So the only way after the time, the only reason why you couldn't play is because of your sight, right? Not the ability to physically play the instrument.
No. It had not. I mean, obviously, not playing for 3 months, you lose the chops, but that can be worked back up. That's not really. I didn't injure anything here, oddly enough. Landing on my head didn't really do anything to the jaw area or anything like that. It was just the eye.
Yes, absolutely. So with the help of your friend, you came out of that stage of life.
Yeah.
Back, and you mentioned that you had an iPad. Did it help?
Yeah. Well, I talked about, before some of the surgeries, we had a new chair come in. And I had told him what was going on, that I had these surgeries. I said, well, anything we can do, just let me know and we'll see what we can do. So this iPad is actually the property of the music department at Angelo State University. This is not mine. They purchased this, and this has been a game changer for me. Absolutely. Without a doubt. I've got almost my whole library on here now. And I've also developed some other ways of using this that are very helpful for me, which we'll talk about.
Okay, let's head to that.
Okay.
So how did it change your playing, your life, your preparation, what you have to do to make it fit for you?
Well, first of all, this is the largest iPad currently available.
Okay, so 12
So you all can see just the general size of this thing compared to me. 12-inch, and the display is, pretty much what you would see from traditional paper. The larger pieces of paper will be a little bit smaller, and you can sort of crop those to fit on the screen. But the other thing that is also possible to do with these iPads is you can flip them sideways, and then that makes the size of the music that much bigger. You just have to turn pages a bit more often because you're dealing with a half a page at a time, and that can either be done by tapping in the lower right-hand corner here, or they make foot pedals that will, you can connect via Bluetooth and use that way. But I discovered that in some cases, because traditional music is set up so that you're seeing 2 pages at a time, and with the iPad you can generally just see 1. I mean, you can set it up for 2, but then it's too small for my eyes to see, so I don't use that so much. So in a former life, I was a copyist, and I'm very fluent in phonology. So I would actually start to take some pieces of music and put them in finale and format them so that they were easier for me to deal with. And I've got an example here that I'll show you, and you'll probably see this on the screen. This is a piece by Elliott Carter called Gras that I was working on. This was the spring before I fell, so these kind of problems presented themselves way before that issue. And you can see all these 9 tuplets down here that continue onto the next page, and I just didn't have enough facility with learning how to run the foot pedal at the same time I'm playing this ridiculous passage and having to turn a page in the middle of it. So I got the idea, well, if I just put that section in the finale and put it all on one page, and then I don't have the page turn issue to deal with. I ended up recopying the whole piece because the piece is fairly short. And so as a result of that, now all of those passages here starts from up here and goes down to here, and all those 9s are now on one page. They're bigger, they're much easier to see, as you can tell just from looking at that, and I'm sure you'll see it on screen at some point here. But that made it possible to play something like this. And it's difficult enough on its own, but having to tempo an iPad somewhere about there in the middle of all that madness to turn the page, I just found that was not working.
Okay, so turning horizontal and seeing a line in that size, is that good? Is it a good fit for your eye? Is that natural, or do you still have to work with that, bring it closer to your eye? What is...
Well, with a normal piece of music, it can be. I ran into some issues where if you can scan paper music and turn it into a PDF and import it into this. And depending on how it was scanned, sometimes when you went to turn the page, instead of it turning to the bottom of the page, sometimes it would turn to the top of the next page. And that became problematic. And I'm still got a few pieces that I need to deal with and figure out how to make that work so that it's a little easier to do. In some cases, like with Amanda's piece, you just met Amanda Harburg.
Yes.
Her piece was one of those in which I had that problem that would turn to the top of the next page, so I ended up recopying the clarinet part to her sonata later on. But for a lot of stuff, like I didn't bother copying out, say, like the Brahms sonatas or the Mozart concerto, because after a while you don't need to look at the music to play those if you've been playing them long enough. But
so you mentioned finale.
yes.
Did you use any notation recognition software, or you just started from scratch and typing in the notes in finale?
I start from scratch.
Okay.
I've been using Finale since version 1.0. So, like I said, I'm fluent in it. And it's almost easier for me to just sit there and type it all in.
And then you can edit it, you can format it,
Yeah.
you can print it in PDF.
And then if you have more MIDI capabilities than I have, then that's that much easier for you all if that's something you want to look into.
Absolutely. Well, that's definitely a great help. And we see nowadays many performers just use a big iPad or a screen and then just use pedals or multiple pedals.
Sarah Watts has figured out a way to just constantly, she's just tapping the screen. When she was playing her recital on, I think it was Wednesday, she doesn't work with a pedal. And she just manages to get the music formatted in such a way that, she's got her right hand free to do that or whatever. Which can be done, but again, that takes some preparation.
Yes, absolutely. So, talking about preparation, what are the cautions that you take in planning and preparation for performance? With having the disease, having to copy and perform pieces off of a screen, what are some of the things that modified that?
Well, I spend a lot more time in the preparation process. Actually, I now put everything into finale, unless it's something like the Brahms or something like that. And so what that also allows me to do is it allows me to format so that the pages are not a distraction. It allows me to put in cues that are very visible. It makes the music much easier to rehearse and perform with. And one of the benefits of copying the music like that is you get to learn the piece on a whole new level. When you are responsible for putting every note in, you know what the notes are at that point. And so I'm even writing in fingerings as part of that process. If I want to make sure I'm using the right pinky, I'll indicate that in my part. And I've even figured out how to write in multiphonic fingerings with finale. It takes a little bit more work, but it's not something I had to learn how to do. I already knew how to do that.
Okay. Another aspect of modified playing relates to orchestra playing. What can you tell us about if someone is an orchestra player having an eye problem? What are some of the things they can reach out to someone? They can make themselves their surroundings, whether light or anything else, modified for them.
I honestly do not do as much orchestral playing. I've done some. But again, I get everything on this, even if it's just the regular printed part. I'll get it scanned, and enough of the directors around where I am know me well enough. They just send PDF. But my condition does make it harder to see a conductor. That is an issue because I tend to focus really on what I can see here, and especially now in my 60s. My vision going back and forth and having to switch back and forth very quickly, my eyes don't react all that well. So if there's a spot where I know I need to really focus on what the conductor's doing, I try and memorize what's going on here so I can pay attention to whoever has the stick.
Okay.
But that is a complication for me.
Would conductors make it accessible, for example, giving you larger cue motions?
They will, quite often do whatever because I will explain to them my situation, and if I ask, can I have a bigger cue here? That's not a problem.
So they were very forthcoming.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Even in the days before I had the first surgeries in 1990, I was doing that with a conductor in the Las Vegas Symphony when I was playing there. And he's an old friend anyway. I wrote my dissertation on his music. He's a composer. And I was just like, Virgo, I need a bigger two here. Can you just, yeah, no problem. So that just requires some communication with the music director, whoever that is. And they want you to do well because that reflects on them. So they'll generally help you out with that.
So we can safely say, just be open.
Yes, absolutely. We have a student, or we had, he's graduated now at ASU, who had much worse vision than I did. And he had sort of a smaller version of an iPad that he would rest on his arm. He's a trumpet player, so he didn't need this arm to play. So he basically had the music like right here. So then we talked quite a bit, and we've got another student right now who's a low brass player. And we've talked about, he recently got an iPad, and it's changed everything for him. And I have a specially made stand that I put this iPad on. It's basically just a microphone stand base, but it's got a clip on it that will hold the iPad in place. And I let him borrow it for a student recital, and he was like, where can I get one of those? It was really fat, and the smile on his face was really, it made me feel good.
Nice. That's very good. And obviously, having gone through a decade-long challenge, really helps you be prepared for other people's accessibility and accommodation.
It wasn't straight through. In my 40s, I was fine. Yeah, I needed glasses after I turned 40, but every 40-year-old needs some sort of modification. That's just part of aging. So I didn't think anything of it. It's when I got a little bit more past 45 that it started to become an issue.
I think you also mentioned to me that there was a violinist in the Chicago Symphony
Yes.
Orchestra that had a much worse.
And this same low brass student who I
Okay.
mentioned told me about this situation. I had heard about this woman, a violinist, and she had basically her eyesight was going almost completely. She had big dots in her field of vision, and she was able to see around them, but having to play at the level you must have to play in the Chicago Symphony was challenging. And I read this article, and she had a son who was in tech business, and he devised this screen. I don't think it was quite as big as that television we're seeing over there on the wall, but it was much larger than this iPad. It probably took up about 2 music stands worth of space. And then the librarian at the Chicago Symphony scanned everything so that she could have all her music on this contraption, and she was still playing it, and she talked quite a bit with, I think it was Moody who was there at the time.
Okay.
But again, she was communicating with the music director. That's not something you can hide from somebody when you're having that kind of problem. But they made it work, and the orchestra definitely helped her out with that. I don't remember her name. I tried to get in touch with the people at the Chicago Symphony, but I could never find a number to talk to this woman. I think it would be fascinating to see how she's still doing. And if her son has made this commercially available, it's probably very expensive, I have a feeling.
No, absolutely, but I'm just stunned by the amount of accommodation that she received in the Chicago Philharmonic or Symphony. She could have been told,
Yeah.
that, or laid off, just based on not being able to perform naturally. But and that actually is a big plus to all those that work with those musicians.
Yeah.
So I don't think musicians should necessarily be afraid of saying, speaking out for themselves.
Definitely, you have to be your own best advocate. You have to be. Because otherwise people are going to just wonder what the hell's going on.
And if we could conclude this discussion with retrospectively, how do you feel? How do you see that this whole decades-long challenge and going through these problems and solving for yourself made you a better teacher, a better performer, a better helper for others in even music or outside of the music sphere? How do you see this trajectory of your life?
Well, I won't deny that I wish that the fall hadn't happened. That's the one thing I wish I could take back, but obviously the past is the past. But it's made me aware of a lot of the other kinds of disabilities that I've had presented to me with some of my students. And I've, on occasion, used this with some students. So I had one that was autistic, and blowing things up really seemed to be something that helped him out quite a bit. So we worked with that, but he didn't take to this so much. He preferred just bigger sheets of paper. But it makes you more aware that there are other kinds of problems that your own students or your colleagues might have, and just to start asking questions and seeing what the best route you can send these students on, or who to get them in touch with. So, obviously, what I know is very specific to my own situation, but you learn who you can turn to. I'm sure most campuses now have a disability office of some sort, and become very good friends with the woman who runs ours at Angelo State. And we've talked both about some of my student situations and about what I do.
Well, in my experience, most of the time it is where to look to, who to look to, rather than providing a straight solution
Yeah.
to a problem that is very valuable.
Because, quite frankly, this is a situation with me that is probably going to be with me the rest of my life. So I have to learn how to deal with it. And I've done okay with that. Like, I've shown you some other things that I've done with the copying aspect. And then, again, not everybody out there is going to have the finale chops to do what I knew how to do. But this is, for example, Claire Donatoni. If you don't know this piece, yeah, I'm sure there's something out on YouTube where you can follow along the score. And this is his hand manuscript, and it's tiny.
It is
So
tiny.
even with good eyes, this is tough to try and read through, and it's just, on top of that, it's extremely difficult. So I decided I wanted to play this at some point, but I knew I would never be able to do it reading this size. So I threw that in the finale. And so that's basically the first 4 gestures. You end up turning pages a lot more frequently. Right. So you got to be very familiar with your foot pedal situation, or
Get a pedal at hand.
yes, but I spent the time. I've still got to go through this because I can't see that well. There are obviously mistakes in here, but I sent it to Saro Berti, and we're actually going to get together later this afternoon. He's gone through everything I did and found what needs to be corrected. So we'll go through that, and maybe at some point I'll actually be able to play this damn thing.
Nice. And we are here at ICA 2012 or 2022, and you have played solo.
Yes.
You played in the professor's choir.
Yes.
And you're doing great.
I got some good response. One of the composers I played a piece of was here, and she was just, incredibly complimentary. It was nice to have her here. And one of the people I work with, I mentioned the name Virko a little while back. I did a piece of his, Virko Ballet. He lives in Las Vegas. And he's actually the person who got me finale to begin with. He was the one that got me started working with that back in 87, 88, or whenever it came out for the first time. But in working with him, we've figured out a lot of things about what looks best and so forth. And I've got a couple of the things that I shared with you that I'm sure you'll put up. But there's a piece here, hand manuscript by Violet Archer, a solo piece of hers that I've redone. And that looks like this now.
Okay.
And again, with the horizontal, that's a beautiful, nice, beautiful, large notes that make it very easy to be able to see that even with eyes like mine. And there was one other one. Oh, I got the wrong one here. Veronica Crosses, Canadian composer, bass clarinet piece of hers. And this, I do a lot of this anyway, just some composers' hand manuscripts are better than others. I'll try and say that as politely as I can. And so it helps clean up some of that aspect. Because with me, some people would have no problem playing from something like this. But for my eyes, there are too many distractions, there are too many, anything that makes my eyes shift to something else that can be problematic for me, trying to play something. So that ended up looking like this once I got done with
Very
that.
nice.
So, and it's very clear, there's still some things I would want to do with this.
Nicely formatted.
But I would certainly be willing to share anything that I've done with anybody, providing we're not breaking any copyright laws, which is, always, you want to make sure that everything we're doing is above board.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Tim, you had a very fascinating story and a very challenging story, but I'm glad that you are here you're performing and you're teaching and you're at force, and also that you have shared this with very openly with the rest of the world, especially with the clarinet community.
And that's part of what this event is about sharing, about being with the people. And again, it's so nice to be here in person after, the events of the past couple of years. But, and just learning from everybody else. I mean, and really, if anybody's got questions on how I deal with this, or if I have certain pieces already in this format that you might be able to use, you're going to put my email address.
Yes, we can certainly do that.
So, I will gladly help out anybody who needs assistance with that, because I've already put a lot of work into that, and if I've already done the work, then I'd be happy to share that with anybody.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for coming to this episode and sharing all this with us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.